So in this video, I want to talk to you about one of my favourite things, which is money. And that might sound a bit weird because most of us have been taught like not to talk about money because it's quite rude. But I think often as women, we undervalue ourselves in the marketplace, and our fear of asking for more money basically means that we don't. And what I've learned from my male colleagues is actually they're much more confident and much more bullish about asking for more money or getting a pay rise or bonuses. So I thought it'd be really interesting to talk today a little bit about the things that you can do to have good and constructive conversations with your bosses about how much you're worth, what pay you get, and then also bonuses and other things like that. So let's get into it. So what I'm going to do is break it down into four main points that I think it's really useful for you to talk about money with your bosses, and that's going to allow you to have like more constructive conversations, but to go into those conversations with a clear idea about what you want in terms of money. So the first area might seem really obvious, but the strongest point to negotiate is kind of when you're on the way into a job. Now, they've obviously established their need for the role and they've kind of selected you as the preferred candidate. So you're already kind of in a strong bargaining position in terms of you don't have to take that job, and they know that. And in fact, actually, when you're recruiting, loads of people drop out at that stage. So they're ready for that negotiation phase if they need it. So if you're accepting a job offer, don't be afraid to push the envelope on what the number is. They will probably have a range that they're looking for, and they're always going to pitch you at the bottom end of the range. So don't be afraid to establish like what their salary band is going to be looking like and what's that based on. So some of that will be based on experience, team fit, what you bring to the role, extra skills and stuff. So think about what you can bring to the role and have those conversations. Now that may well be with a recruiting manager rather than like the actual boss, but they will kind of have those conversations internally. So if you've been offered a job, before you accept it, have those discussions about pay and perhaps be prepared to push the envelope more than you thought you were going to. The added benefit is if you do this on the way in is it establishes you as a strong negotiator, and it establishes what you are prepared to discuss money. Lots of people rely on the fact that people don't like talking about money and will just like, if we don't mention it, no one's going to bring it up again. But obviously if they've seen that you're someone who's prepared to negotiate and knows your worth in the market, that's going to set you up better for future conversations about pay rises and bonuses if you do take the job. Most companies expect some sort of negotiation in corporate roles. Now this isn't going to, if you've applied for a minimum wage cleaning job, this probably isn't going to be applicable to you. But if you're slightly later on in your career or you're in a more corporate role, they are going to expect some sort of backwards and forwards on pay. So don't be afraid to have the conversations. The worst they can say is no and you're stuck with the original offer. You've lost nothing, but at least you kind of understood where the company's at. The second point where you should raise the subject of money with your bosses is if you're asked to take on more responsibilities or they're changing your job role slightly. So it might not be a full like formal consultation or a whole like scale change, but perhaps they're asking you to like train a junior or to take on another client or to try a different sector or to try something a bit different. Ask the question, does this come with these are additional responsibilities, like does this come with an additional pay rise or an additional bonus? And it sets up the expectation from day one. So rather than you taking on extra roles and then feeling like annoyed because no one's come to you and like offered you anything, you can have that conversation with them. And then you have a choice to make. It's either like I take on this additional stuff but there's no pay rise, but I know that, or I don't have to take on this additional stuff. Now you might choose to because actually it's going to teach you some new skills, expose you to some new people, and will look better on your CV if you go for a different job elsewhere. But just think about it, if you are asked to do something different or extra at work, ask the question, like, does this come with an additional salary bump, or what flexibility is there to renegotiate? The third time that it's useful to talk about money is when you're kind of going into your annual appraisal or performance review process. Now, the boss will be expecting some questions about money in that. It's kind of when most of us raise those as questions. But what you need to do is rather just have a conversation with money is you need to take some examples into that meeting and perhaps send them to them in advance in terms of what your expectations are, just so that they can kind of get the breadth of it. So I would take some examples of where you've received like positive praise or good feedback for something you've done very well or something that someone wasn't expecting. So where you've gone over and above your job or you've done something like to a really high standard, take in those examples. So rather than you just saying I'm really good at this or I really delivered on this, you've got someone else corroborating like the value that you delivered and how useful you were. The second thing that particularly women often don't do is back it up with data. So what we tend to do is talk about like how we've been good team members or like how we feel, and it can be a bit softer, but actually one of the things to do is back it up with cold hard data. So take in your performance metrics, take in your sales if that's relevant to your job, take into the deliverables. So all the things you've delivered and where you've met the expectations or exceeded the expectations of where they are. So you may have metrics in your role, or it may be a bit more kind of woolly, but most people have some targets or outcomes that they're trying to work to. So take in the data that shows how you've met or matched those, or hopefully exceeded, and then what that does is allow no grey area about, oh well, I think I did this well, or I feel this went well. Like, you can absolutely show with evidence how you've met that responsibility. The other bit where it's useful to bring in data is also perhaps where the market is playing those roles. So if you're in a kind of role that's quite comparable and there are job adverts out in the market, you can take that information into the meeting. So you can say, oh look, this role at X company or this role over here is paying this amount. I'd like to see if we can negotiate to get closer to that. So what that's going to do is show your expectation, and also that you know your worth in the market, and also where the market is. So if your firm's really lagging behind, your company's lagging behind, they'll probably know that, but also they'll be keen that they don't lose another member of staff to that. So also bring in some data about the type of salary you're expecting, but have that backed up with, this is the salary that other people are paying, not just like a number that you really fancy like pulled out of the air. That's probably not going to kick it. But if an organisation can see that like they're going to be losing staff to somewhere else because they're paying more, then that's going to help the conversation. As well as the cold hard evidence, which I talked about, the other thing to do is set out what you bring to the team. So perhaps if you've got a slightly different skill set, or you bring a wider set of experiences, talk about that in your review, because that's what's going to make you a more rounded individual, and help show your boss that you bring like wider worth than just your deliverables. So it might be a different viewpoint, it might be other things you're involved in, but just bringing that wider set of skills to their like awareness is going to help you be in a stronger place to negotiate. So one good example of how I saw this in my career is someone who wanted a pay rise, and they wanted to do some coaching work with some of our staff, brought in the experience they had of coaching sports teams, and although that was outside of work, they obviously had the skill set, so that allowed them to negotiate more of a pay rise, and allow them to do slightly different in their day job. If your boss is kind of seems unsure about your current performance, speak to them about what you can do in the future, and what you might be able to take off them, which is going to give you extra responsibility, which will enable you to get pay rise in the future. So that might be training new members, it might be attending certain types of meetings, preparing certain types of reports. Find something your boss doesn't really like doing and offer to do it for them, and that's going to provide value for them, which in turn is going to make them think more favourably when you talk to them about money. So identify perhaps the things your boss doesn't really enjoy as much or isn't as good at, because those are probably things he wants to pass down. So make sure you do that and offer like added benefit in the future should you get more money. Now, you may well have an appraisal standard in where you work, but if you don't, what I do is set up a meeting with your boss to discuss this, but let them know in advance what it's about. No one likes feeling like they're being ambushed or kind of like dropped upon. So if you know you want to talk to them about your pay, set a meeting in the diary and send them an email to explain them like why you want to talk about it, but also set out some of the cases and your expectations. That allows them, if necessary, to go and do a bit of homework, or to get some sign off from HR or whatever else they need to do. And so you can come to that conversation much more meaningfully. If you just drop a surprise meeting on them and don't explain to them about what it's going to be about, then they're not going to have time to get their ducks in a row and come to you with a sensible offer. So make sure that you're not wasting their time and your time. So set a date, tell them what it's about. If there's anything you need them to make a decision on, or any information you want to send them in advance, then absolutely do that. The other thing, which I kind of touched upon earlier, but is basically come up with a realistic number as well. If you're on 30 grand, there's no point asking for 50 grand, but asking for 35, 36, 37 may well be a better place to start. So don't go in with a completely unrealistic ask of like 100% pay rise, because no one really gets those. But pay rises between 5 and 10% might be manageable, or if it's going to be something more because it's linked to an overachievement of your project, or you're taking on new responsibilities, then think about where those benchmarks are for your industry and what that role is paying elsewhere. The worst thing you want to do is completely get turned down for a pay rise because you've gone in with a really stupid number, when in effect your boss might have been prepared to meet you a bit lower. So don't be completely unrealistic. I mean, we should all have aspirations, obviously, but just don't like overly go for too high, but go for something that's kind of realistic to where you are. The other thing that might sound really weird, but it's like practice asking for it. So you might be like playing this out in your head, but actually when it comes to the conversation, it's going to feel a little bit forced, because many of us don't talk about money, particularly with people who are above us and have the authority to make decisions about how much we're paid. So one thing I do is practice a few times your ask. So run it through. It might be like in the mirror, or like these days, like record it on your phone, watch yourself back, like just do it a few times, practice it so you're really comfortable with it and it feels like a more genuine conversation when you get there, rather than feeling like quite a stilted, awkward conversation, because that's going to make both of you feel a bit awkward. and a bit like uncomfortable, and then that's not going to help the meeting go as well. So practice it a few times so you're really realistic about it, really comfortable, and can deliver it in like a friendly way. If you can, I'd do like a little practice run through with a friend or a family member, someone who can interject and like do some uncomfortable body language and perhaps challenge you a bit on it. So it's all very well to have like a prepared like speech almost, or a monologue, but inevitably your boss is going to come back with some questions or queries, and you don't want to get thrown off by that. So if you can, get someone to kind of mock it through with you, like just workshop it, and see where the potential gaps are in what you're asking for or what information might be needed. It's going to make you feel more comfortable going into it. It's going to help you respond to any queries they have more naturally, but it's also going to perhaps help you to spot any gaps or any kind of glaring errors that you've made that are going to make the conversation not go as well as you want. And finally, what I'd say during those conversations is thank your manager. So even if they don't agree to a pay rise or don't kind of give you the outcome you want, still thank them for their time. Sometimes it's not within your boss's control. There might be things going on in your company that you don't know about. There might be a pay freeze, there may be something else going on, or there may be a restructuring coming, whatever it is. So it may not necessarily be in their gift, but at least if you set your case out and know what your expectations are, then if you don't get what you want, then you're in a stronger bargaining position about going out to the market or trying other things. The worst thing you can do is never mention to the boss that you want a pay rise, and then you leave for more money and they feel really miffed because they're like, oh, if only I'd known, then we could have perhaps done something about it. So don't blindside them either before the meeting or in it, but be like thankful for their time and respectful for what they bring to the table. There are also a number of kind of don'ts when it comes to asking for a pay rise. So the first thing, which I know is a real bugbear for lots of people, is don't ask for personal reasons. So you may have decided to get married or buy a house or do any of those other adult things that we do, but that's not your boss's problem. So if coming to someone and saying, oh, well, I want to buy a house, so I need a pay rise, that's no business reason. As I said earlier, like linking it back to like your performance, what you're bringing to the company is going to set you in better stead. If you decide to go and buy a ridiculously expensive car that you now can't afford, it's not your boss's problem. And also it makes you seem a bit immature and a bit like unprofessional. So never ask for a pay rise due to a personal reason outside of work. Second thing that women do a lot of is use qualifying language. So we often say, I'm sorry, I apologise, I know this isn't a great time, I feel, I believe. We use all of those slightly limiting phrases. So try, if you can, when you're practicing, not to use that type of language and to get people to pull you up on it. Being much more confident and much more assertive is going to set you in better stead when it comes to those pay rise conversations. So don't use too much softening language or anything that's going to be like a qualifying phrase. The next thing is don't be put off by if you don't get immediate traction from your boss. So as I said earlier, it may not be in their decision-making process right there to be able to give it to you. So don't be put off, but ask expanding questions. So say, why is that not possible at the moment? So don't get put off if they don't say yes straight away. I mean, no negotiator is going to say yes straight off the bat. Or some might, but they're very few and far between. So don't get put off. It's probably going to be a bit of a journey and a bit of a kind of process. So you're probably not going to walk out with like a check of 5k. Make sure that you understand what their concerns are, what the limitations that they might be operating in, and at least it gives you a better idea. The last thing is not to focus solely on a pay rise. There may be things that your boss can do which isn't a pay rise, which are going to be beneficial to you. So it might be a one-off bonus. They're often easier to secure than a long-term pay rise, because obviously that's an ongoing cost for the company. Whereas if you just get a one-off payment, then that's like, there's no expectation that they do need to do that next year. So bonuses might be easier to secure for you. Or there might be something that they can do. If there's no money available, there may well not be. They might be able to do something in terms of your working hours, like either reducing it from like a 37 to a 35-hour week, so you get to leave early on a Friday, or a flexible working arrangement, or putting you on some project. So it may not be that you get a positive outcome when it comes to the money, but it might be something else that you want to do that's beneficial. They might sign off on a training course, for instance. Like lots of employers have to pay the apprenticeship levy, so they may be able to get you on a training course or a development course that you want to do. So it's not going to cost you anything, it's not going to cost the firm anything, but they're going to be able to do it. So don't go in focusing solely on a big pay rise. Think about other things that might be beneficial to you or are going to help you do your job. And the fourth time that it may be useful to negotiate a pay rise is actually when you're on your way out. So if you've done all of those things that I've just mentioned and actually it didn't get anywhere, and actually what you've done is secure a new role, be prepared to have a conversation. Most firms or organisations will do a counter offer, because for them it's more expensive to advertise your role, like pay a recruitment agency, have downtime while you're not here anymore, the new person hasn't started, like the training time for the new person. Actually, like there's a lot of lost money for companies when people leave. If you're the boss, you're going to have to like interview someone, like sift through CVs. It's like a lot of hassle factor for your boss. So they will maybe be able to unlock some money and offer you a counter offer. So when you're handing in your notice, think about actually, do I genuinely want to leave, or is it just about the money? And if it is just about the money, it's not like the other role's much better or like much more interesting for you, be prepared to have some counter conversations. Now, of course, it's really frustrating when you're like, I asked for a pay rise and they didn't give it to me, and then I've had my notice in and all of a sudden they've like found some money. But that's just the reality of the world. As I said, it costs quite a lot to onboard, hire, recruit, train someone. So they're going to see that all as sunk costs within you. So don't be afraid that if you are prepared to hand your notice in, be prepared to go by like nothing worse than a false bluff on this. Like no firm wants you to like retract your like thing. That doesn't work. But like, just be prepared to have the conversation. They may well come back to you with a counter offer. Don't be too offended. That's just the way that the world works. But be open to the fact that actually that might secure you the money that you want. Now, one of the questions that's kind of always awkward is about like, oh, but I know so-and-so has paid more than me and blah, blah, blah. The best bit of advice I ever got about my career, well, one of them anyway, was that don't worry about everyone else's number, just be worried about your number. So if you're comfortable and happy with the number that you've got, then don't worry about other people. There may well be stuff that you don't know about. They may be doing extra projects, they may have been doing the job a lot longer than you, they maybe have a different qualifications or whatever. So on the surface it may seem like that you're doing the same job or whatever, but you're going to bring different skill sets. So don't be too concerned about what other people are being paid. Now, of course, that's completely different to gender pay gap or ethnicity pay gap. If there is a genuine reason why you're being paid less than someone else and that's not fair, then of course you absolutely need to challenge that. But don't be too worried about the coffee kind of whispers about who got bonuses and who got pay rises and what the numbers were. You can't really get sucked into that. Just be confident about your own career, your own worth, and what you deserve to get paid. Don't worry about other people. They're on a different journey to you, but just know that you have the conversation and the tools now, hopefully after watching this, to have those conversations more constructively and secure your pay rises. So that was a bit of a rambly video about like all things to do with pay, and I'm sure there's like 100 more other questions. So feel free to pop any unasked questions in the chat. I'd love to like talk to you about this. I do feel really strongly that as women we need to negotiate our worth, and we definitely need to ask for pay rises and ask for bonuses, something I really didn't do earlier on in my career and I kind of know that others did. So I'd love to hear what your experiences have been on this and join the conversation. Follow me on LinkedIn, or I post here like twice a week on YouTube, and I'll see you next time.